Hi, this is Jim from Vaudevisuals. I'm sitting here in rooms in opposite parts of the country with Dan Kamin, who's currently performing in a show, A Christmas Carol, which he was involved in producing, I mean, not producing, but creating, and he's performing in it on tour. And let's hear about the show, Christmas Carol, very well known book and movie, etc.
There's so many versions, and since I get involved, everybody's been telling me about their favorite version. Some people like the Alistair Sim film. Some people like the Muppets version. A lot of people like the Muppets version. Somehow, I don't know how, because I love Dickens and love all the Dickens adaptations that have come from England. And uh, I never had read the story. I've never seen a single version on stage or any of the movies. And of course, once I got involved with this, I read the story, but I didn't want to see anybody else's performance because uh, I know from experience that's going to inhibit me, or I'll just simply copy all the good things about it, or it'll mess me up. And so really looking forward to seeing them all now. So what happened was, I mean, this is a very unlikely turn of events, as you know, Jim, for me, because my career has been creating my own shows, like so many performers of the kind that you feature on your program and all your wonderful photography work over the years and the books that you've published. Um, and I've been one of those people that has made a living uh, as a solo performer who does their own material. I depart from that occasionally uh, by doing shows with symphony orchestras, but again, it's still me as essentially turning the symphony into a chaotic comedy event, or symphonies that go wrong somehow. And orchestras love doing them because they're all hams, of course, as well. They love getting laughs. Um, Not just background, in the pit type when I do it. Of course, the symphony shows I do all have one thing in common. They're about symphonies that go wrong,
And
so
nice,
concerts that go wrong,
nice.
which you have to add, because otherwise you can do illustrate Carnival of the Animals or Babar the Elephant or uh, and so on, but that becomes like a kind of museum uh, uh, experience. Whereas for kids, especially, the immediacy of somebody who the conductor introduces me and I'm not there. He introduces me as somebody, is a musical mime who's going to help with do the shows, and I'm not there. And he gestures, and the spotlight goes to one side. I'm not there. The spotlight goes to the other side. I'm not there. The spotlight comes back him. And my direction to that conductor in helping him work up the script for this show is this is your deer in the headlights moment. You don't want to be there at that point because you're caught with your pants down, as it were. And the conductor, in fact, says, "Well, this is a little embarrassing. He doesn't seem to be here." And to tell you the truth, I'm a little worried because he didn't come to rehearsal either. And when I called him on the phone, I couldn't tell if he was there because, of course, mimes don't talk. And uh, he says, "Well, we're gonna go on anyway. We hope if he's anywhere in the area, he'll show up." And he starts to conduct, and I come in as a stagehand and start setting up some an easel and some signs on stage. And I trip over something on the stage. It seems to be like a splinter, and start hammering on the stage. And he stops the music and says, "Excuse me, what are you doing?" And we he says, "We're waiting for Cayman to mime. What do you think?" He's pretending that, of course, that this is the most mortifying moment in his life. And he comes over, and I just gesture to hold off, and I zipper down my overalls, and there's a mime costume. And he says, "You can't be Dan Kamin. He always wears white makeup." And then I take off what is, in fact, a very realistic mask of my own face, which was made. I had a head, what do you call them, a life mask done, not, in fact, a complete head done when I was in a horror movie once, and they were building I was playing a wooden Indian that came to life, and they let me have it afterwards, and I've used it to make a very realistic mask, and so it's a big surprise. See, it's kind of a reverse thing because usually the performer puts on a mask and does stuff, and in this case, I'm taking off what seems to be a real face, and there's that white makeup. And the show is a kind of gets at what we were talking about before we began today, about the fact that mime became a dirty word for a lot of performers and a lot of members. It became a joke, an easy joke, at a time when most ethnic jokes were shoveled under the rug again because they're improper now to do them. The many ethnic jokes that Americans, I mean, going back to the days of vaudeville, I have a joke book from 1916,
Yeah.
and the back of it is a list of the other joke books you can get.
Yeah.
And there's the Hebrew jokes, the Dutch jokes, which of course Deutsch, German, and so on. Everybody in America, we tend to think, oh, certain groups were horribly stigmatized by this, but in fact, every single group in America saw themselves parodied on stage, in the vaudeville stage, by grotesque caricatures of their particular foibles. And our friend John Towson, who wrote the brilliant book on clowns, points out that literally every culture does that. Even the smallest island culture finds a subgroup to attribute the characteristics of the clown, the fool. And of course, it's just folly, as we all are involved with one way or another. In my case, in my daily life, and whether I like it or not, because I've always been a clumsy idiot. But that's completely not what you asked me, which was about Christmas.
That was
But it leads
a
into
wonderful
it because,
description of your orchestra show, though.
well, it's one of the things that's been the most fun to do, and one of the places where the mime stigma doesn't hold, because in fact I'm making fun of the cliches about mime, and the cliches about conductors at the same time. Because the next thing that happens is the conductor comes over and says, "You didn't come to rehearsal. We don't have anything prepared. What do you expect to do?" And he's holding his baton as he said this, and I grab the baton and we literally start wrestling over the baton. He pulls it away from me and he says, "No, I'm the conductor. You're the mime. If you want to play tug of war, do it with somebody from the audience." And I get a kid up and they play Benjamin Britten's Simple Symphony, the last movement of it, and the kid and I, and it's actually a kid cold. I don't prep the kid, do a tug of war with an invisible rope to the music. But that sets the difference between a symphony piece or a symphony concert and a theater piece that we are involved in, is that in a symphony piece, you're not asking the basic question that gets you through a book or a play or a movie, which is what's going to happen next. I mean, that value is in movies. I mean, in music, it has its own climaxes and theme and variations, but not necessarily don't forget, when you go to a symphony concert, everything's out of context. You hear an overture, but nobody sings. You hear the symphonic dances from West Side Story, but the Sharks and the Jets are nowhere in sight. You hear an opera overture, nobody, and so on. Everything is somebody selected around between the 18th and 19th century. Somebody decided the music by itself should be enough to entertain, to compel audiences. And so, but for children, that's not often enough. And so, hence, I was filling a little bit of a gap, turning kids on to this treasure chest of great music, but putting it in context, not violating it, but in the same way that movies will use that Stanley Kubrick used the great theme of Richard Strauss, Thus Spake Zarathustra, for 2001. It wasn't intended for that, but it fit it, and music. So it's a wonderful meeting of the two arts and making fun of the two arts in a sense, in a respectful way as well. So that's been my career, and but I didn't start doing anything this ridiculous and flamboyant. When I was a kid, I got hooked on magic, and that's why I was contacted about working on this new production. We just debuted it. I'm not sure when this will be broadcast, but we just debuted it the week before Thanksgiving in Farmington, New Mexico. It was developed there. This is a production that's been going around for about 6 years, and they sent it to. Last year, it was performed in Farmington, New Mexico, at a great big theater that the city runs, a civic theater, and the civic theater was run by a very gifted director and theater manager named Randy West, and he gave them some feedback. It was a non-musical production, and he gave them feedback that he thought would improve it, and they got all excited about it. The producer did, and was also the author of this adaptation. And Randy is a protege of Sondheim, and he said, how would you like it if we turned this into a musical? And he had musical people in mind, and he called me because I had worked with Randy several times for him, just doing my shows at his theaters in various parts of the country. And he thought he knew the magic stuff. I always work magic one way or another into my programs.
Nice.
And he thought, because of the ghost element, and there's only so much you can do on stage. In a movie, Stanley Kubrick, even way back then, you can't have people flying through space on stage. And yet, The Christmas Carol is as science fiction as you get. It's all about ghosts and manifestations. And so, the first ghost that comes, Scrooge's old partner, Marley, in the book, I didn't know this because I just read it, like a month and a half ago. He sits down, he's wearing a scarf, and he loosens a scarf, and his jaw drops onto the ground. And, we can't really do that in stage production effectively as you could in an animated or CGI. But Randy thought maybe I could bring some. So we instantly started brainstorming. And then Randy sent me what was very bizarre about it is he sent me one of the songs that he had been essentially replacing dialogue with a song, because of course in a musical the song has to advance the story. A lot of productions of Christmas Carol, they use Christmas carols, but of course there's nothing to do with the story other than the fact that it's about Christmas.
Right.
But it's not about the plot. The plot is about a specific guy having a specific problem, and we know what the problem is about because Dickens takes us into his past life, and we see how he got warped. So he sent me one of the songs, and I said, would you mind if I, why are you sending this to me? And he said, I want your feedback. And I said, Randy, when performers ask other performers for feedback, they really only want one thing. You were great. Like after a show, what do you say? You're going to say, don't quit your day job? I've never said that to anybody, even if I didn't like their program. And I try not to be, if I really didn't like something, there's always something to like. I learned,
Yeah.
So and Randy said, look, the reason Stephen Sondheim made my career, because he recommended me to theaters all over the country, is he said to me, you don't have an ego, Randy. You just do and you don't know how rare that is. And so I did a draft of the song, and then I didn't hear from him. And I thought, I've been fired because I hurt his feelings by not just saying great. And in fact, when I called Randy back, he said, I thought yours was, I just gave it to the composer and said, you choose, because I think his is pretty good.
Wow.
And he chose mine. And within 2 days, he wrote music for it, which blew my mind because it made my humble doggerel lyrics actually sound like a song. And
Nice.
and so Randy said, if you have any other, so it ended up that we completely collaborated. I became the co-lyricist of this show,
Wow.
which meant that I wasn't spending much time rehearsing the show because all the actors in the show, I will admit this to your audience because I presume a lot of you are performers out there. All the actors in the show, a lot of them they're all professionals. They're all, almost all of them, and many of them are just recent college graduates. And this is the kind of thing recent college drama students do. They get into a road show where they're driving in vans or a car or a bus around the country, and they're like we are now. Right now, we're driving across the country because we can't perform. We're taking our time because we can't perform at Thanksgiving, and it's Thanksgiving week, so it's great. So we're just taking several days to get across the country to the next thing, and but what they're used to, what these college students are used to, recent college students, is memorizing scripts quickly, because the industry, which has always been, essentially holding onto the cliff. The fabulous invalid, as somebody called it once, or whatever it was, theater, the profession itself. Um, uh, it's boiled down to there's a 2 week rehearsal period that used to be 4 or 5 weeks, um, and they all knew it and they were ready to do it. I was busy writing songs, and
Mm.
I thought, oh, I'll just pick this up. But Scrooge is off stage for about, uh, I would say it's maybe 4 minutes of a 2.5 hour show, and some of it is just watching other people do the stuff, but a lot of it he's the center of attention.
Wow.
And suddenly I realized, you know, when I do my own shows, it doesn't matter. Even if you write your own, as all of you know out there who are who write your own material and do your own shows, um, you develop it over a long period of time. It comes organically when you put movement to it, or if you are movement centered performers, sometimes just movement. That takes a while to learn, but when you're learning words and movement together, it becomes easier, at least for me, to learn the words once I have the movement associated with it, the blocking. So in some cases, I was really working on things that I thought were great. I was hitting these positions and postures, and and of course, when we started rehearsing, that was no, you're going to be walking backwards and to the left when you do that, and then you turn. And I'm blubbering like what was that to be like Jackie Gleason, I'm gonna hop and thinking that and I've been the dunce of the group, and because everybody else is like, okay, got it. So
Right.
every time somebody flubbed, including during our 2 debut performances, I can't tell you what a relief it was for me not to feel like I'm the only idiot.
Yeah.
Uh, and but because we're all struggling to get this enormous, it's all new, 20 songs, and they're new
Wow.
songs.
Wow.
I don't have, I couldn't sing them. I'm pulling a Richard Burton, Rex Harrison, because there was not time for me to, in fact, learn to sing, which I've never taken a lesson at. And I had the shock of realizing that as wonderful as for years I've been in the shower, when I actually recorded my voice and heard it, I realized, oh, I don't know what I'm doing, and so they graciously let me sing. Let me sing by not singing, talk singing the parts I do. But I still learn the music to do that because I'm coming in on there's still music playing. And for the singers, it's word for, and part of the learning process is that some of the lyrics that I wrote, the composer did beautiful music, but he put the word that I learned that if he has an eighth note followed by a quarter note, uh, uh, it stresses the wrong syllable sometimes, or he's put the stress on the wrong word where a rhyme doesn't read anymore, because it's like Mary had a little lamb and the lamb was white as snow. No, you don't get the rhyme. There wasn't a rhyme there actually, but by the time the third, you wouldn't get it. And those, and so the composer, Randy trusted me enough that he gave me. He said, "Just talk to the composer," and the composer was cranking this stuff out, and like confetti out of a machine. It was amazing, and the quality was amazing. And he would easily fix those things and tweak them. Not
Wow.
all of them because of the speed that we're working at. So it's been like I've been trying to think of the expression, and it means juggling too many balls at once, but it has something to do with a hurricane. Is there of somebody who's trying to like trying to thread a needle in a hurricane?
Right.
What would you call it when you're just doing too many tasks at once, too many
Hmm.
hats? So that's
Multitasking.
what the position
Multitasking.
that
I mean, not
it
multitasking.
is, but there's a funny expression, sort of like
Oh,
juggling too many balls.
I gotcha.
There's an analogy. If any of your listeners know it, I'd appreciate knowing because I've been trying to think of it because it's been what my life has been, and uh, so I did work some magic into it, and the physicalization. My background as a movement performer. A lot of the times I'm just looking at a scene, but it's very so it becomes a mime performance. And I as for example, well, I should get to more to the point of this, which is it's been a wonderful experience. One of the thrills of my life to hear, in some cases, my own lyrics being set to beautiful music sung by really terrific singers. but also the story itself. It all comes down to storytelling, and I didn't realize because I wasn't familiar with this piece um, how very compelling and primal Dickens' story is. It's so much about loss. It's so much about grieving. It's so much about making a mistake and being too stubborn to correct it. Things, in other words, that we all experience as part of our journey. And it's been very, very compelling and moving to work on, and a privilege, really, to work on such a great classic as this and give it uh, and know that it's such a classic that we can afford to take liberties. I mean, you can't do the story literally because it's very literary.
Hmm.
It exists as images, and Dickens doesn't fill in a lot of backstory. There's some gaps in the story. Apparently, he was working on a deadline too, um, and
What's the story with
so
the
we.
production itself? How many people are in the cast, and how many people say are in the production crew for the show that you travel with?
Another interesting challenge that connects to threading a needle in a hurricane, or juggling too many balls. It is as you know, a lot of theater has gravitated towards two-handers or four-handers. This is a full-scale cast. It's about 15 people or more, and they're all traveling, including a couple of children and their parents. And but there's not enough money, even though we've got a wonderful tour going, which will run through the holiday, the Christmas holiday. Um, the cast is the crew.
Oh,
Uh, when they walk off, they're all playing multiple characters, but they're also doing every scene change. They're schlepping the tables, the beds, you know, uh, playing some of the weird ghosts that come in that are there's one ghost that's a giant puppet, which many of your listeners and watchers will relate to, because we're all in all these related fields, and so it's there's nobody who is snapping through this. It's luckily we've got a master director in Randy West, a master choreographer in a woman named Sarah Harkins, who at one point the big liberty. For those of your folks who have your listeners, watchers who are familiar with the story, the big liberty we've taken is there are three, there are four ghosts that he encounters. His old partner Marley, the ghost of Christmas past, present, and future. And past rakes him over the coals, showing him the failures of his life, the losses of his life. He's lost his sister who died in childbirth. He's lost his love of his life because she's, thinks he's more into the business and his profession than her. She's going to play. She doesn't want to play second fiddle to his business career, um, and that's. And then he meets and the ghost of the future is going to show him what's going to happen if things don't change fast. But the ghost of the present is, in our version, I think in Dickens as well, he's kind of trying to josh him out of it, trying to shake him up just by doing what a good comedian does, which is to make you laugh. Like kind of comedians we used to have, like Richard Pryor and George Carlin, Don Rickles even, who would take the things that we're all tiptoeing around now, all the words that are improper, and they were taking those words, as you remember, of our youth, and just shoving them back in our face in a way that took all the air out of the whole sensitivity thing, and made it possible for us to relax with each other again.
and laugh
And right
and
now
laugh.
we're in a
Yeah.
you know yeah. And so uh, so I knew that I was in good company when I suggested a rubber hand be part of the show, and everybody got excited. The writer Lowell Williams and Randy both got really excited about the notion that when present comes and manifests, I say, "Who are?" He says, "Mr. Scrooge, I presume," and we shake hands. and he moves away, and I'm still holding his hand, and his stump is still shaking in perfect synchrony with mine, and and that meant that there was going to be a sea change aside from music, because you can't start with a rubber hand and then he's suddenly just reciting Dickens. He's got to keep doing it,
Yeah.
and he does, and we've gone along with it, and I'm very glad to report that in our opening weekend, at which all of us were wondering whether there would be a collapse of a set piece, or because of all the moving parts of the show that have been put together. So maybe a better analogy, I'm coming closer to it, is like putting up a shed during a hurricane,
Oh.
putting up a shelter, making a straw hut, during a hurricane. Wasn't there Big Bad Wolf, I guess, is the story.
Yeah.
Um,
Right.
uh, but in fact, of course, the main concern is an audience going to be repelled by this violation of this beloved story, or are they going to go along for the ride?
Mm.
And our audience was just ecstatic, and we got so many because we want to, of course, not shy away at all from the moving elements and the real pain inherent in the story. It's not just that Scrooge is an easy villain to knock down um, in our version, but he's a guy who's experienced the experienced the universal losses that come to us. I love that Shakespeare line about the ills that flesh is heir to. We it's such a great concept, the notion that it's our inheritance. We're all going to suffer in this world, and if it's not sooner, it's later, and no way around it, and die. And the sense of mortality about the show, and of course we don't want to think about that
Mm.
because for obvious. And when you think about it, all the Halloween, all the horror movie images that you've ever seen in every form, and you see them on Halloween, are all about death. They're all about decay because, of course, it horrifies us. Mainly because we know that's that's a ride we're quickly taking, and you can't, like a dream where you can't stop the car. Uh, we're heading there, and
Yeah.
we just would love, and that's the function of comedy. We just would love not to think about it, and then somebody comes along like a great clown, and lets you think about it in a way that's funny, like Muppets Smoot do it, and the you name it, and um, so the emotion is real, the emotion and the contrast of we have a particular emphasis in this that was our author Lowell wanted to have, um, that what Scrooge, it's not just about the money thing that's made him go wrong. It's about the renouncing of the importance of family. He had evidently a bad. Dickens just gives us the slightest hint. He's in a terrible boarding school. He's been put away, and he's got a sister who comes to get him at one point. But we don't know what happens when he gets to back, and we don't fill in the scene. But we have a line. We've added a line simply that didn't go well. And we know that because of what happened to Scrooge. And we also know that his sister died in childbirth. I'm not sure. Is that part of the story? I think so. It's part of our story anyway. Um, uh, and those two losses really informed his becoming, as you know, as we all know, when we have catastrophes happen to us, sometimes people, will say, well, these things make you strong. Well, they make you strong in some ways, and they make you weak in some ways, or not. One or the other. And many people, they get walled off, and as life, deals them blows.
Yeah.
Um, and so we wanted to make that very vivid, but also have fun with it. And so present is a riot, and Randy literally wanted, when he, I give the hand back to him, and we have a wonderful actor named whose name I'm currently blocking on, but I'll get it. Berry is Tanner Berry, uh, who is playing the role like Liberace on speed, and he says, I said, well, who are you? But who are you? And because I've already had met past, and I can't imagine who this guy is. He says, who am I? Funny you should ask. And suddenly a Broadway chorus comes on. I mean, and literally, who is he? You may ask. What's his game? And suddenly they're in a kick line.
Wow.
And as he's and and after the kick line is over, and I'm Scrooge. I'm a 19th century guy watching a 20th century fishnet stocking kick line, and appalled by it and shocked by it. And when it's over, I say, when the group comes in, I first say, who are they? They're my, and he just answers in the song. They're my crew. We're here to help a guy who needs cheering up. That's you. And I interject things as they're doing it, such as, um, uh, I think I'm going to be sick. And lines like that. Is there no end to this torture? That sort of thing. And so it keeps it in the 19th century at the same time as totally anachronistic. And of course, you can't limit a 19th century ghost to in the 19th century. Presumably, he's in some eternal place where he can access, our time. That at least is our premise. That's our liberty.
That sounds
We've had
wonderful.
great
That
fun.
sounds like a wonderful,
Yeah,
wonderful production.
well, uh, well, I think it is, and it's stunning. As I said, the music is really stunning.
Yeah.
And
And where what are
so
the
it's a
some of the
privilege.
places? Where are some of the places you're performing this show?
Well, we're doing it. We started in New Mexico, going to South Carolina, doing a number of shows in the South, going back to the Midwest. We're going to be in New York City at the Queensborough Performing Arts Center, I believe it's called, yeah, in Queens, right?
Yep.
Um, and uh, and in Buffalo, in Delaware. I don't think we're doing much New England other than the New York things. Uh, Most of it's in the South and Midwest.
Right. Right. Oh. So
But big houses,
how,
two, three.
how many performances are you doing in all on the road?
So it's like a couple of dozen.
Oh wow.
So yeah, we start right after Thanksgiving, and it'll go, straight for, it's basically a month
Nice.
long tour of once Thanksgiving
Nice.
will end December 22nd in Buffalo. Tonawanda, it's like a suburb of Buffalo. And some of these places are old. One of my favorites, when I started performing with symphonies, one of the joys of that is that they're often in the old movie palaces, which are in turn the old vaudeville palaces. And those are such great theaters to perform in. And they just, uh, modern theaters can be very striking, like Disney Hall. But uh, when you go to an old movie palace, something in you
Amazing.
deeply relaxed.
Yeah.
It's
Amazing.
It's like the Roxy Usher painting. It's just that the coolness, the smell of popcorn, the giant screen as they used to have, um, and they are the people's palaces.
Yeah.
And uh, they were called Nickelodeons at first, sort of as a way of making fun of them, because of course Odeon is the Greek word for a theater, but they were not charging what vaudeville houses would charge. Would be, maybe 15, 20 cents. They would charge a nickel at first. I'm talking 1905.
Right.
First one was where I live in Pittsburgh. The first one called that. It certainly wasn't the first theater showing movies or the first, converted store showing movies. Um, and so when we get into a real beautiful theater like that, or anytime I can be in that as an audience member or on stage. And the symphony stuff has been great because it's I can't, I'm not well known enough to fill a 2,500 seat house on my own, not yet. But after this tour, but with a company doing a major familiar story like this, there are two. It's not going to be in Pittsburgh because there have been two productions of Christmas Carol that appear annually, like the Nutcracker, and for the last 40 years or something, they've been running for Christmas, and it's such a perennial, and that's why there's so many variants on it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very popular. Very popular holiday treat for families and this and that. But let's move on to some other things that you've done in your life that are quite significant. When you go back a little bit,
You're not talking about my trouble with the law, are you?
well, I don't know about that part. That's not in your
Tell me it's
bio.
That's right. Oh, what am I saying?
But then you,
I do feel I've gotten away with murder doing a profession like this. And
right.
all of your listeners who are in the profession.
So what is your early days studying mime? Who did you study with when you first started taking classes back in the day?
Well, before that, I was very lucky. Okay, my career has been a series of just lucky, dumb accidents, uh, often stimulated by movies. When I was a kid, I saw the movie about Houdini with Tony Curtis, and that movie just knocked me out. But I didn't know what to do with it. And then I was sitting in a school assembly in seventh grade, and a kid sitting next to me showed me a magic trick with two sponges. Put one in my hand and one in his hand, and suddenly his was in mine. And I was well, and I was so stunned by it. He said, "Come over to my house. I'll show you some more." And he had been doing that. He was also sort of a mechanical genius. He knew how to. Uh, he was repairing people's televisions and radios. This seventh grader, but he showed me a bunch of magic tricks, and he didn't like to perform by himself. So he said, "You want to do shows with me?" I said, "Yes," because of course I was trying to figure out. I'd love that Houdini movie, but how could I ever do something? You had to be like a godlike person, right? And so we started performing shows together, and a couple of years later, but we wanted to be like Houdini, and because this kid, his name was Neil Benavia, because he had this mechanical aptitude, he had something I didn't have. He figured out how to analyze locks like Houdini did, and to make master keys for them. And he started making master keys. He just had a file and a not vice, and he would make, and he figured out how to, and every time he made one, he would give one to me. And we had this notion that if we had accumulated enough of them, we could be like Houdini. We could be escape artists and challenge people to lock us up, bring their own locks. And of course, this never happened. But one day he gives me a key, and the key is a key that opens all the master locks on the school lockers. And I put it on my key ring, knowing I'll do nothing with it because I've never done anything with any of them. But I had a big key ring of skeleton keys. And the next day, somebody in school is caught breaking into a school locker, and he's busted. And this was serious. They got city detectives to come and talk to the kid. And he said, "Where'd you get the key?" And the kid turned in Neil. And the detective said, "Where'd you get the key?" He said, "I made it." And they said, "Oh, and you sold it this, you're stupid enough to sell it to this kid who was going to steal." He said, "Do you make it? Did you make any for anyone else?" And he threw me under the bus.
Oh,
Neil said, "Yes, I made one for this." And I was interviewed by school detectives, and I was given a choice of a 5-day suspension, which would go on my permanent record, or 3 swats with a baseball-sized paddle wielded by a dean of men who, in my recollection, had no neck. And now, if I was Houdini, I would have laughed at them, knowing that they couldn't lock me up in a cell that I couldn't escape from.
mm,
But the fact that I was not Houdini
mm.
was made crystal clear to me by my mother, who was sitting next to me sobbing hysterically. And so I made what I still consider to be possibly the worst decision of my life. It was a 5-day suspension, like a 5-day vacation or a brutal beating with a stick. Pleasure or pain. And I chose pain because, of course, my mother and I were both thinking, this is, I ruined my life, my permanent record. It would be on my permanent record, like a tattoo across my face. Uh, and so, needless to say, my uh, my working relationship and friendship with Neil did not survive. I couldn't deal with him
Mm,
after he did that,
mm,
and I never spoke to him again
mm.
until I started working on this show, which is all about a cold heart. From this perspective, I understand why he did what he did, because he was terrified as I was, and naturally did. And I called him up. It has been close to 60 years since we spoke, and I tracked him down, called him up, and he didn't. He barely remembered the incident. or my blowing him off. He was just thrilled to hear about me, and he kept his interest in magic. He doesn't do it anymore, but he kept his interest. He used his mechanical acumen to buy all these electronics parts that he resells to the Navy and become a millionaire. And he's coming to my show in South Carolina that I'm doing Saturday night. So we're going to see each other for the first time in all these years.
Wow.
But growing up in Miami, that was one experience of many. The people who mentored, after I sort of went my separate way, I discovered there was a community of magicians, and they would meet at a restaurant in downtown Miami every week for lunch. And I started going there. There was always, mostly to my 15-year-old eyes,
Mm.
a bunch of old guys schmoozing. But there were always a couple of them doing magic, and always a couple of teens who wanted to learn magic. And I met some amazing mentors, uh, some of whom were criminals who would, because Miami at that time was an early Las Vegas kind of gambling
Casino.
scene.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and I was meeting people with actual people who were real, with names like Evil Eye Finkel, who became a character you might remember from Little Abner, Evil Eye Flegel in Little Abner. And he was a legendary sort of con man that had convinced people in the boxing industry that he could give the evil eye. So they would hire Evil Eye to sit ringside with their boxer and glare at the other opposing boxer to spook him. And he was, that was his life. So, but along the way, I was also meeting people like a dealer from pre-Castro Cuba, when it was a kind of a vacation spot, who was expected to cheat for the house. And needless to say, he did great card work. And magicians are always in awe of real card handlers, because with a magician, I can do a thing like this, or take a deck of cards and shuffle it with one hand or whatever. Somebody who's a card cheat would be in the alley with his head severed or his hand severed in 5 minutes if he pulled it. Theirs is the art that conceals art. And so I was fascinated with these people, and they liked mentoring, people and young kids. And to the extent that I was offered a job on one of the boats that right offshore it was a gambling boat off of Miami, and the guy's name, his first name I'll tell you, was Jose, and he explained to me why it'd be okay to be cheating people. He said, Danny, you have to understand. Every once in a while, I'm at the casino in Cuba, and the little old lady is sitting there, and with her change, I slip her an extra $20, and I watch to see what happens, Danny. And you know what happens? She looks, she sees, she looks up. So you see, everybody cheats if they have the chance. And this was very flattering, but I didn't want to embark on a life of crime. So I instead embarked on a life of mime. It was a thrill to be able to do magic shows to my disappointment, the kids were not interested in things like this. They wanted to see bunnies and hats and scarves. So I got the props to do magic. I could make money. It was amazing to do that. But I was going to go to college, and but then I saw another movie when I was in college studying. I went to Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, to study industrial and graphic design, because I couldn't see myself as a performer, smoky nightclubs, a performer. But then they had a great film series on my campus, and one year, what was great about it, it wasn't like other film series where they showed the film that was at the movie theater 6 months earlier. They started with silent movies, and they would go. It was like a film art. It was called the Film Art Society.
Nice.
And they would chronologically move up through the 20th century till they got to these really hip, sexy, wild films by Ingmar Bergman and Fellini and so on, and films from India, from Japan. In 4 years, we saw, without ever anybody giving a program note or a talk, we saw what had happened in the 20th century through the eyes of our most important art form.
Nice.
And midway through, I saw for the first time a Charlie Chaplin movie, because in my childhood, in the America of my youth, Chaplin was persona non grata, and his films were never shown in theaters. and they weren't shown on television. He was considered a kind of a friend of mine just wrote a book that's probably going to become a bestseller called Charlie Chaplin versus America, about how Chaplin was a kind of unsung victim of the McCarthy era. And I say victim and unsung because the McCarthy era's power was to blackmail the movie moguls
Right.
into blacklisting blacklisting specific film artists. The problem with Chaplin is that he was such a popular, phenomenally popular and successful film artist that in 1919 there was no studio big enough to hire him, and the three other biggest figures in Hollywood, Mary Pickford, Douglas Fairbanks, and D.W. Griffith, formed their own studio. They called it United Artists. It's still here. You couldn't fire him. You couldn't get him blacklisted because he owned the studio.
Right.
But you could turn the public against him, which is what the government did and what Scott Iman's beautiful, brilliant book is that just came out.
Wow.
Highly recommended to anybody interested.
I'll look it up for sure.
Culture. But anyway, I saw this Charlie Chaplin film, never saw one before, and it caught me off guard like the Houdini movie did, for very different reasons. I couldn't understand why jokes that were made decades earlier were funny, and that there was no sound in the film. There was we had a live one of the drama students accompanied all the silent films during my 4 years, and they were strangely good scores. And we found out why later. The guy's name was Stephen Schwartz, and he wrote right out of school. He wrote Godspell and most recently Wicked. But we were hearing his songs; they were just as good back then, and he improvised, and and so we were hearing top-notch scores that backed up these great silent movies. But what do you do with that? What do you do with any more than what do you do with the guy who gets dumped upside down into a giant thermos and escapes? What am I going to? The bathtub I know will not hold the water if I tilt it up. In the case of seeing Charlie Chaplin, though, there by again an enormous stroke of good luck, there was a guy on the campus named Jewel Walker, and Jewel, many of your listeners, what do you call them? Listeners, viewers, I guess,
viewers,
of your program. Will be familiar with Etienne Decroux, who trained Marcel Marceau, worked with Jean-Louis Barrault in the film Children of Paradise. Between the two of them, Etienne Decroux and Jean-Louis Barrault, working in France in sort of obscurity at first, defined a new form of mime for the 20th century. It had already been redefined by silent movies, but as the silent movie era was ending, they wanted to do it in theater, and so they figured out they wanted to purify theater, and so they figured it's decadent now with too much frou-frou with the sets and obsessions with realism. Why not reduce it to its essence? One person on stage, without dialogue, without costuming, possibly nude, simply creating an evening of theater. Why walk across the stage when you can show a person walking without walking? Or why use a prop when you can evoke the prop? I mean, this is the one I'd like to demonstrate for. Let me see. And of course, when people saw these optical illusions, which were introduced to the world, some of them in, ironically, the great biopic film about the great 19th century French mime, Baptiste Dibirot, but when we saw some of their creations, the walking without walking, which ultimately led to the moonwalk later, and so on. Decroux came when Marcel Marceau came to America and started performing in New York City in the 50s. He became a sensation. Everybody wanted to know where he learned his chops, and he was very, he always acknowledged Decroux as the original creator. And so the Actors Studio brought Decroux to New York to teach actors. And Jewel happened to be in New York at the time, and somebody told him that taking a theater class would be a good way to meet girls. So he went to DeCrew's class. He studied also with Meisner and who were the people who were the Actors Studio founders, Uta Hagen and what was it? Herbert
Yeah,
Bergdorf,
HV Studio. Yeah,
who was this? Yeah,
that was later.
uh,
Yeah.
uh, yeah, and Jewel got completely hooked on mime. Became a part of DeCrew. DeCrew was here for 4 years. Jewel worked with him, and he started going on the road and meeting with some success with a partner named Tony Montanaro. And he found he didn't like so much being on the road, so he took a job at Carnegie Mellon, which was in between getting a job at a theater company. He wanted to go into regular theater, but he was hired naturally because of what he studied with the crew. And mime was really hot then in the in the world of theater. Marceau was well known, but there wasn't a general mime awareness or that many performers doing it. And Jewel, by again a stroke of just amazing good fortune on my part. The same year I came to Carnegie Mellon to study art, he came to teach drama. And I saw this Charlie Chaplin film, and then I saw him do a show. And in his show, it was about a 40-minute show, about 10 sketches. One of them was a sketch about a trial in which he played like 14 different people. And everyone was crystal clear, and it was funny, and it was harrowing. And but what struck me is when he would lean on nothing, and because it was like a magic trick, and it was like the way Charlie Chaplin was telling stories with his just his body,
Mm.
and so I did what I did with magic. I just started how you weren't allowed to take a class in the drama department at Carnegie Mellon if you were not a dramatic. They had auditioned dozens or hundreds of people a year for just a few openings because it was already a famous drama school. And but I would stop Jewel in the middle of the camp and say, well, this thing, what do you do? And he would take a few minutes and show me. And I would go into the boys' bathroom in the student union, had a wall-sized mirror. So I would go and try to practice. Somebody walk in, I pretend I was washing my hands. And eventually Jules just said, well, my lesson that I learned in Miami was these guys, some of whom were criminals, some of whom were just old hobbyists, but the great teachers, a great teacher is powerless before the enthusiasm of a student.
Mm.
And eventually Jules said, just come to the class. And so I would I'd be in the back and, I would go with him when he was doing shows, and often it would, working the lights meant turning a light switch on and off in places because he wanted to turn it off while didn't have a sign holder. So he would hold up his own sign. He did this beautiful statuettes,
Wow.
positions, and then would blow everybody away with these illusions that at that time very few people had seen.
Yeah.
Marceau was appearing on Ed Sullivan. He was becoming a celebrity, but it was a very, maybe once every 3-4 years. It wasn't until the 70s, and ironically, the talk shows, that he became this sensation that was kind of always here,
Yeah.
touring almost all the year. Once, if you were in a big city, you would be there every 4 years or something.
Yeah.
And so I didn't know what I was gonna. I did it like I learned to do. The coin thing. I wanted to. There's something about it that was very compelling, and what happened for me was the Vietnam War happened, and the night before I had my draft physical, I couldn't sleep. And I'd been studying with Jewel, but I never thought I could make up a story or a mime number myself. I was doing what he did in class, just like a student playing scales or a piece by Beethoven. And but that night, um, somehow I made up 4 mime numbers, my first 4 numbers, and one of them was about a soldier. And uh, but there was no way to know, just like a magic trick. No matter how much you practice, there's no way to know whether you're going to fool anybody until you get to try it,
Yep.
and it's terrifying. And then when you do, it's electrifying for you. And same thing. I made up some funny numbers. The soldier number wasn't funny at all, but I wanted to know if on the basic level, does anybody understand what I'm doing? Because mine is, you find out very quickly, the audience doesn't like going for an evening of charades. If they have to guess what it is, they get annoyed at you. And and especially if you're with a school group, in front of a school group, especially with children, they don't have a lot of patience with you if you're not clear.
Mm.
And so I began trying to find audiences that I could see whether I could speak to them in that silent movie mimetic language, and that's how I got started,
Hmm.
and was lucky enough um, uh, to be able to make a living doing it, uh, and the whole movie thing that came out that you and I have talked about was because I did something very stupid. Again, uh, uh, the Chaplin films just obsessed me. I just thought he was the greatest artist. Of course, every mime considers Chaplin the greatest mime, including the other great mimes, Keaton and you know Jackie Gleason, Red Skelton, you name it. For them, Chaplin is he was the star of stars, and um, because his stuff is at a level that really you can say many people like but it's like choosing between your children. It's he was up there, and for them he was it. And so my graduate school was watching those films. I acquired prints, illegal pirated prints. It was the only way to see them, and I found ways to find them, and I would travel to other cities sometimes to see if I would see advertised a sort of underground showing of a Chaplin film, and I'd never seen it. I'd known about it because I started reading books about Chaplin, everything I could find, but I couldn't find what I was really looking for in the book. When I got into magic, aside from Neil helping me out, the school library had books on it. Public library I got every one of them, and I poured through them. And believe me, learning to do a magic trick from a book, a complex thing, uh, with line drawings, often crude line drawings, and photographs are kind of faded. Uh, like trying to learn to do tumbling or play the piano, musical instruments from a book.
Hmm.
It's really now people can see tutorials, and it's so much nicer because I would be learning a thing to do with a deck of cards where a movement that's that fast that would take 3 pages with its explanation to because what you're accomplishing in that is something that the audience can't see,
Right.
but that is a tremendous deceptive sleight that you can use to do amazing miracles. And but there was no all these books about Chaplin. There were so many books, and they often gravitated to this fascinating life story because there was so much sex in it. There was so much scandal in it. There was so much celebrity sighting in it. It was like the story of the century. I mean, literally born in the slums of London, homeless for periods of time. Mother goes insane. Father's an alcoholic, uh, and suddenly he finds himself not only the most famous person in the world, but literally the most famous person who has ever lived on the earth because of the nature of his fame was a medium that the entire world, everybody that had electricity was watching. I've been to China doing shows, and I said something about the Wizard of Oz. They had a press conference when I went there at first, uh, and I said something about the Wizard of Oz, and they all looked at me, and I started singing somewhere, none of, and I didn't think about why should they know that. That's our one of our cultural touchstones. I
Hmm.
started naming things and actors and people. Only when I got to Charlie Chaplin, when I said the name Charlie Chaplin, they all went,
Mm.
you know, because he just crossed all the barriers because his instinct for how to do primal theater, like the Dickens story, to do stuff right from the beginning that was about the fundamentals. He is hungry. That film that I saw, the first film of his was The Gold Rush, and I was once asked to talk to some college students about before we watched the film, and I said to them to prepare them for it, what's the most important thing in life? And people said, well, good job, well, good relationship, yeah, good. Nobody said what the gold rush was about, which is food, shelter, hunger, and basic survival.
Exactly.
Uh, and his idea for the gold rush was he looked at pictures on stereo cards, the viewmasters of the time, about the Donner Party expedition,
Hmm.
where they got snowbound in the 1840s in the Sierra Nevada mountains, and after they'd eaten their provisions and their animals and their shoelaces, each other. And Chaplin was looking at these pictures after breakfast at his friend Douglas Fairbanks' house and thought, what a great idea for a comedy. And it is. You remember the scene where he turns to a giant chicken,
Yeah.
and you know they put one of the men from the set in the costume because he didn't want to get into it, and the man didn't look like a chicken. Chaplin got into it, and suddenly he is a chicken, and you know it's funny and ridiculous. You know, who would think of doing something so bold as to put a giant chicken suit on, and the guy sitting across the table takes out his knife like this and starts chasing him around the cabin, and it's funny, but it's horrifying at the same time.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, so, you know, but the technique with which he presents that stuff, particularly his own physical technique of performance, was, and it took me about 4 years, Jim, watching the films before I could see one from the outside because they so enchanted me. I just would sit back and relax and enjoy them again and again and again, laugh over and over at the jokes. I became like a vampire to invite house parties of people so I could just see how their reactions, sort of spy on them if they're editing it. But then one time I was watching one of them. I was watching Modern Times, and it was like a rubber band snapped, and I suddenly was looking at it for the first time from the outside and starting to notice technical things that I had never noticed before, nor had I read all the books I could find. Nobody ever spoke about these really simple things, such as he liked long shots, crowd scenes, and yet your eye always goes to him. And I realized, well, he simply painted his face whiter than all the other actors. And in the middle of it, there's this square. It's like a bullseye that makes your eye go
boom.
And he surrounded it with this, very, curiously uh, uh, appealing curly mop of hair, but it's always very nicely shaped. And the hat, and he's got the black costume, which is a distinctive shape. So he could be, 1,000 feet away, and you know it's him. And plus, mainly the way he's animating the clothing and the character. He's conveying it with every movement and every moment. He's conveying essentially a hurricane of information, which is why he ultimately created these great comedy routines like that fill his films, but also very many moments, just casual moments, but like the great set pieces. The one that got me in the Gold Rush was, of course, he's invited the dance hall girl and her two friends, to dinner. And he's starving prospector. He's borrowed somebody's house sitting in a cabin. And so we see him doing comic attempts to make money by shoveling, but he shovels from one stoop onto another one, so he's got another job. And he uses it to buy enough a beautiful Thanksgiving turkey, which he makes, and he tears a newspaper into it like a tablecloth with like a doily type tablecloth. And he's made all these preparations. And of course, the girls have forgotten that they agreed to come. It was a joke. They were just making fun of him to agree. And he's sitting there waiting. And then there's a dissolve, and they're sitting around the table, and we don't know. It seems like time's passed, and they're there, and they're having a great time, and they're all laughing, and he's put little party favors at each plate. And one of the girls, the one he loves, Georgia, says, "Speech, speech." It's in a subtitle, "Speech!" exclamation point, "Speech." And he gets up, and he goes in a subtitle, "Oh, I can't, but I'll dance the Oceana Roll." And he sits back down, and he takes two bread rolls, like long bread rolls, sticks forks in them, and he makes them dance on the tabletop, a very curious dance. And as I would watch it repeatedly, I realized that, one of the things that's so enchanting about it is it's a mix of different kinds of dance. He's doing things like this, like a can, but he's also doing things like this, like a kind of eccentric dancer. But the forks essentially have become like little spindly legs, like his legs. The buns, the rolls are disproportionately long compared to the forks, just like his shoes are oversized. And on top of it is this giant head, and his head was proportionally large for his body. So he's created a puppet replica of himself with him being the head. And that I realized was one of the secrets of his comedy is almost every time he picks it up, he turns it into something else, like a magician would,
Mm.
or like a clown would. That's used as a theater game in improvisation training now, is to use one thing like another. Every time he picks something up, it becomes something. So it was like, I knew what it was. It was a magic trick. It
Right.
was a transformation.
Right.
And his thinking was, and so you're getting, just like in a good magic show, you're getting, he's telling a story, because what happens after he does the dance with the rolls, they all applaud, and Georgia gets up and gives him a kiss, and he falls over backwards, and suddenly there's another dissolve, and he's sitting there on the table, and he's asleep. He wakes up, and the greatness of it as a film scene, and this was so great as a film scene, that when the film was shown in at least one place in Germany, the audience went nuts so much that the projectionist had to wind it back and show it again right then and there,
Wow.
because the audience just would, screaming. And but the greatness of the scene and the power of it is the fact that that dance makes us fall in love with him if we haven't already been. And the fact that he wakes up and the girls, we see the next shot is them celebrating at the museum, at the saloon themselves. It just tears your heart out
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
see that they're so callous, and he's like this endearing, innocent. He often plays in his early films quite a womanizer. Not a womanizer. He's not doesn't have enough status and power to really be able to he just meets women in the park, and he comes on to them, but in these very funny and charming ways
Right.
that charm them. He's flirting with them, and he's not doing that in the Gold Rush. He's much more a passive, innocent character,
Mm.
and so when I started having thoughts like that about it, and realizing that I couldn't find these ideas in books, like the simple idea of, and some of them were just because I'd been performing then for a few years, and I was having the kind of insights that any performer would have, that somebody who's not a performer, not experienced in stage or movement work or whatever, theater, uh, I thought maybe I'll write an essay, and it turned into a book, which was a stupid thing that I did. It's a very long answer to your question. Um, it was stupid because who would read a book about Charlie Chaplin's makeup technique and how his movement communicates, his body language, and analysis really of the body language and the structure of his gags in the way that I've been talking about, and probably boring most of your audience and you yourself. But to me, this was compelling and fascinating, and but that book opened up a world of me to me, because Chaplin fans all over the world contacted me. The book was published, and and one of the people who got hold of it was Robert Downey, again blind luck, as he was preparing to play Chaplin in the movie, and he called me up in Pittsburgh, and said, I think you may be the only person who can help me pull this off, and I'm coming to meet you.
Wow.
He had been going around and meeting various people to help him do it.
Mm.
And we came in and we began working on the thing, and he got me hired on the film. And so it was just dumb luck to be able to. I mean, I looked at it really, of course, it was a great opportunity for me professionally, but I've since developed some programs I do about. I don't play Chaplin myself. I'm too, I'm 6'3" and he was like 2 foot tall. But I understand what he does enough to teach it to other people,
Right.
and I've developed some other programs. But I always think of them as just one thing. As far as I'm concerned, Jewel Walker, Tony, my magic masters, and especially Charlie Chaplin, handed me my career on a silver platter, and it's a thank you note from me. It's always a privilege to be able to give them back, to give back something by enhancing people's appreciation, to show them from a kind of another actor's perspective, or a mime's perspective, more specifically, to reclaim that word.
Mm.
What makes Chaplin's art tick? Because unlike a magic trick, if you explain it, there's no magic left. When you talk about the craft of a great clown or
Mm.
comedian or actor, it only makes you appreciate it more, makes you appreciate that person more.
And now you're doing Christmas Carol, which is like almost a full circle in a way, right? I mean,
Yeah,
it's
it's what actors do.
it's
And, I
speaking.
never took an acting class except with Jewel. I mean, you can call of course, he's trained many great actors who acknowledge, Holly Hunter will acknowledge him when she receives an award and things. She studied with him. And Terry Jones was the one who acknowledged him. But he was a great master teacher. He just died a couple of years ago,
Mm.
regrettably. And his wife is going to be coming to my production of Christmas Carol when I do it in Wilmington. I'm
Oh,
very glad to
nice,
say, because
nice.
we became very close over the years.
Well, it's been great talking to you, Dan. I'm sure there's a lot more to talk about. We'll have to make another interview.
Well, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for letting me hold forth.
Thank
It's
you
always
very
a
much.
pleasure to talk to. It's a thrill for me always to visit with to have reunions with friends like you who know we have so many people that we know, and that the general public, we have to explain, you know, my daughter studied with Lecoq, but what does that name mean to the general public? But as soon as you say, oh, if there was no Lecoq, there would be no Lion King, they say, oh, okay, I get
Yeah,
it.
that's that's a good note to end on.
Yeah,
Stay with me though, because I want to talk to you after we stop recording. Hold on. Thank you, Dan. Appreciate it very much.
pleasure.